We will go ahead and get started. So I'm Melissa Reed, I'm the Director of the Human Relations Commission, and I've been tasked by City Legal Human Resources to put on this cultural humility harassment prevention training. We'll talk a little bit more about cultural humility. You guys have probably heard of it in the way of bias training, sensitivity training, cultural competency training. I choose to look at it through the lens of cultural humility, and I'll kind of explain that to you in a little bit. So we do have our day kind of set up in two different sections. The first section is that cultural humility kind of versus cultural competency. We're going to go over some terms to make sure that as we move through this presentation that we all are on the same page. We're going to talk about our cultural identities and how those are socially constructed, which leads us into having biases and stereotypes, okay? All of us experience some kind of biases. All of us have stereotypes. That does not mean that we are racist. That does not mean that we are prejudiced. That just means that because of messages that we've been exposed to throughout our lifetime, it has just created some feelings and thoughts about people, things, places. So we're going to try to find a way to have a better understanding of our biases, and then how we can make sure that we're providing high quality, unbiased services. As city employees, we all provide a public accommodation for our community members in some capacity. So we want to make sure that we're doing that in an unbiased way. This presentation was really put together as like a self-exploration activity. I don't really want to be up here and lecturing to you, so I'm going to give you some tools, some examples to help illustrate some of these concepts today. I am very laid back. I am kind of caged here today, but I'm very laid back. So if you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns as we move through this, please stop us. The second part of our afternoon is your right to equal opportunity. So that means your right to come to work in a non-hostile, a very non-discriminatory, accepting environment. We want to make sure that as co-workers that we are treating each other in an accepting way. So we'll just kind of get into what our policy tells us. So we all signed an anti-harassment policy when we got our job here for the city. So we'll kind of review that policy a little bit. It may have been some time since some of us have signed that or reviewed that. We will talk about bystander intervention too, because we have some rights and responsibilities if we feel that we're the target of discrimination or hostile work environment, but we also have some responsibilities if we observe some of that behavior. So this really is about an hour training. When I do this for Ivy Tech, I'm an instructor for Ivy Tech, and I go to local unions, carpentry unions, and labor unions. That second part is a 4-hour training. So we do move through this really, really quickly to put all of this in an hour. So if you have any questions moving forward, if you don't want to spend the time as a group, I can stay after and we can talk about some things afterwards. So the first term that we have here is culture. And when we're talking about culture, I'm not just talking about our national origin. Okay, so we all participate and navigate different cultures. So some of us may belong to church families, some of us may belong to knitting groups or pool leagues or dart leagues or bowling leagues. We might have special groups, social institutions that we participate in. And in each one of those social groups, there's a culture involved there, right? So just being an employee of the City of Terre Haute, there is a culture that is created as an employee for the City of Terre Haute. There's artifacts in each one of these cultures. There's values in each one of these cultures. There are things that are very important in each one of these cultures. So for an example, if you participate like in an AA meeting, you might receive a sobriety chip. That chip really doesn't have any monetary value, right? But to that person who's celebrating sobriety, it means a whole lot, right? That's one of those artifacts in cultures that I'm talking about. So it's not just different countries or just different origins. It's just we navigate different cultures as we just move through our daily lives. And the way that we are expected to communicate and the way that we are expected to behave is told to us by those that have been in this culture longer than us, right? And so the way that we behave may be at our church group may not be the same way we behave when we're at work or when we're participating in our pool league. So we have to kind of change our way of behavior and thinking when we navigate these different cultures. Diversity is really just those differences that should be celebrated. Implicit bias, we get into bias a whole lot here in a few slides, but I always like to put this on this term column so that I can remember to tell you that sometimes our biases are favorable. They're not just unfavorable. Sometimes we favor people based on their appearance, even if they don't deserve it. Our cultural identities, those are socially constructed. So our cultural identities is that whole rich tapestry that makes us us. The way that we communicate, the way that we act, the things that we hold value to, the things we place value in, okay? All of our different relationships belong in that identity. Assumptions is just something that we think is true without any facts behind that. A lot of us assume a lot of different things because of messages that we've received. Oppression is that prolonged unjust treatment of a particular individual or group of people. And privilege then is the opposite of that. So privilege is any kind of special consideration that somebody might get. When I'm talking about privilege, I believe that everybody experiences some form of privilege in their life. Even an example, attractive people experience privilege. If you have a certain shoe size that is a very popular shoe size, when you go shoe shopping, there's a lot of choices for you to pick from. But if you kind of deviate outside of that popular size, if you're bigger or smaller, there's less choices for you to pick from, right? That is privilege as well. And then stereotypes are just oversimplified ideas. So I told you at the beginning that I like to look at this through the lens of cultural humility. This is not a new term. It was coined back in 1998. It really started in healthcare services. So our doctors and nurses were realizing that there was a different way to kind of address this bias, this sensitivity, this competency when we're talking culture. So it started in healthcare, and then other care services started picking up on it, and now it's becoming more popular in public accommodations. And what it really tells us is that our education and credentials alone are insufficient to address those social inequities. Meaning that we can take all of the classes on a particular culture, we can read all the books, we may even go and visit that different culture, that different country, but that's still not going to give us all of the knowledge that we need to address social inequities. It allows us as providers of public accommodation to understand the worldview of those that we are serving, and it really lets us put into consideration any oppression or discrimination that our consumers may have undergone. And it asks us to really suspend what we think we know based on the generalizations that we hear. So, since cultural competency is a term that we're more familiar with, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of put both of those side by side so that we can talk about them a little. So cultural humility really allows us to focus on our own personal reflection and the growth around culture, okay? So we can increase our own awareness. Cultural competency really said that you could achieve a goal and then you could be competent in somebody else's culture other than your own. So if I read 15 books on this particular culture, then I could be competent, right? But cultural competency then believes that culture is monolithic, meaning that everybody who identifies in that culture has had the same life experiences, the same exposures, the same worldviews, the same discrimination, the same privilege, when we know that that is not true. When we think about all the different cultures that we navigate through, we know in our church culture, we may not have the same experiences at all. Within our bowling league here at the city of Terre Haute, as we try to increase our and add more diversity to our workforce, we know that we don't have the same worldviews, the same experiences or exposures as other people. So we cannot assume that others feel that way too, right? So cultural competency really wanted to place people in boxes. If you identify in this culture, then you dress this way, you like this type of food, you listen to this type of music, you had this exposure, you've had this experience, And you're all going to act that way. You're all going to like that same thing, and we're going to wrap you up in this box, tie you up in a little red bow. So anytime that we have experience with somebody from that culture, we're going to assume that that is how they act, behave, and we don't take them on an individual basis, right? So cultural humility is really lifelong learning, and it allows us to learn from those we serve, learn from each other as coworkers, so that we can get people out of those boxes and start dealing with them at their individual needs instead of as what we believe, based on generalizations, what their needs are. Cultural humility really diminishes any power dynamics. So we kind of have to get into then our own identities. And our cultural identities, they are really socially constructed, right? So when we were small children, whatever household we grew up in, people, the adults in that household, the people we had exposures to, they started planting seeds. This is what we like in this household. This is how we behave. This is how we communicate. This is what we think about other people, groups of people, individuals, right? And so they start planting those seeds, and as we grow up, those seeds are either watered because of other experiences and exposures we've had. Other people have the same beliefs, thoughts, values, or they start kind of getting weeded out as we have experiences with people who maybe have had different thoughts, ideas, ways to behave, right? So we start out in this household, and whatever experiences, messages that we've been given, then we get a little bit older and we start seeking things outside of our homes. That might be preschool, social, Sunday school, right? We might start having more time with cousins or extended family members. Then we get to a point where our peers are the ones that really influence us the most, right? Because we are human beings, we have been placed on this earth to engage in relationships with other people. So we're constantly trying to find where we fit in, right? And so our cultural identities, we belong because others don't. So we try to find those groups where we belong, right? Not to be exclusive of other people. One of the identities that I identify as is a Minnesota Viking fan, right? I'm probably the only one in this room that belongs to that group. Others don't, right? Not because we're exclusive. Everyone is welcome to jump on that bandwagon at any time, right? But it's just one of the identities that I identify as. So we belong to these different groups. We try to find people that think like us, that behave like us. As we kind of move through life, though, we keep getting messages about other groups or individuals of people, right? And when we are growing up and we're starting to learn our own personalities, we get opportunities to exert that personality out into the world, right? That's how we find these groups that we want to belong to. And so if as we are exerting this personality out into the world, and we come across a group of people that we might think we belong, and we get up in front of that group of people and we say something, and they laugh at us and call us stupid. In an isolated incident, that probably is going to sting a little. We're going to be like, oh shucks, that's not the reaction that I was hoping for, right? But in an isolated incident, it's probably not going to be too big of a deal. But if time after time after time, we get up in front of groups of people that we feel we belong to, and each time we say something to them, they laugh at us and call us stupid, then we kind of start having a feeling about ourselves, right? Oh shucks, maybe I am a clown. Maybe I am somebody who deserves to be laughed at. Maybe I am stupid, right? And so this can be said about us, not just because of our intelligence, but because of our socioeconomic class, because of our gender identity, because of our sexual orientation, our race, our color, right? So if we get into these groups of people and they say things to us like, you act black, you sound white, it doesn't count because you don't look gay, straight, biracial, whatever culture we're navigating at the time, then we really kind of start wondering if we fit in or not, right? So that is that socially constructed of our identities, because we then really are handed our identities, right? How other people perceive us. We perceive ourselves in one way. We perceive that others perceive us in one way, but sometimes we are handed how people perceive us, right? And because of all of those different messages and all of those different exposures, I tell you all of that to say that's where our biases come into play, depending on those messages and the exposures and the people who have said those things to us or who planted those seeds, right? So that's where our biases come from in the first place. That's where our prejudices come from. That's where our stereotypes come from. Implicit biases are different than those that we know about. Implicit biases are those that are unconscious. They may be activated involuntarily. So we may not even know about our implicit biases, but I'll give you a tool so that you can have a better understanding of what yours are. Again, they can be favorable and unfavorable. They really are based on characteristics and the appearance of people, and not just because of their race or their color or where we perceive their national origin to be. We'll get into that a little bit more. These biases are developed over that course of a lifetime depending on the messages and the exposures that we've had. They begin at a very early age. Absolutely everybody has them. They can be gradually unlearned if we know what they are. And these implicit biases are different than those ones that we choose to conceal. So we know about some of our biases, and sometimes we just choose not to say them out loud in different cultures because people will think we're yucky if we say them out loud, right? So our implicit biases are those that we may not even know about. So what are some of examples to kind of help you understand this a little bit better? An example, believing something because others do. And a very simplified example, have any of you ever said in front of one of those groups that you feel you belong to, hey, I really want to go see such and such movie. And their response to you is, ooh, that movie sucked. Wait for it to come out on DVD. Or wait for it to come out on Netflix. Don't spend the $800 it costs to go to a movie these days. Wait for it, right? And so you do because people you trust believe that movie to not be a good one and not be worthy of your money. And then when you do see it, you already kind of have an idea of how that movie is going to be. You already kind of have in the back of your hand, oh, this movie's gonna suck, right? Because somebody else you trusted believed that. We do that same thing with people. Sometimes before we have ever met somebody, before we've ever laid eyes on somebody, before we've ever heard somebody speak, we already have an idea or a dislike for them because of somebody else, right? Or because of superficial information that maybe we've seen on social media. Maybe we favor that person before we ever even meet them because the people that we've had exposures with favor them, even if maybe they don't deserve it. Another example is that somebody reminds you of someone. So if you're in a position to do some hiring or a position to refer somebody for a job, and that person reminds you of your sister, and you think your sister is a real swell gal, she's a great contributing member to our community, she does a lot of community service, she's really smart, she's a hard worker, and you think this person reminds me of my sister because of her appearance, then you might go ahead and refer her for that job or maybe even hire her. But what if your sister is a real gross person? What if she's a lazy bum? What if she's not a hard worker and she would be the worst addition to whatever job she's applying for? Then because of her appearance, you may opt to not refer her or not to hire her, just based on her reminding you of someone. Like or admiration for someone. An example of this is a school teacher gets her class at the beginning of the school year. And Johnny walks in, and Johnny is a good-looking kid. He's very well-dressed, very well-groomed. All the kids seem to like him. He's funny. He's a pleasure to be around. And so because she likes Johnny, because of all of those things, she also assumes that Johnny must be the smartest kid in the room. She has like or admiration for him, so everything about Johnny might be great. When in fact, Johnny might be one of the struggling kids in the class. But just because she likes him, she thinks everything is great about him. Appearance. I told you earlier that it's not just because of our national origin, our race, our color, or our gender. We make assumptions about people based on their age, based on their weight, based on tattoos, piercings. So I like to use this personal example. I'm not so sure that my daughter would like me using this personal example, but I have an 18-year-old daughter at home. And she stands a little bit taller than I do, so she's like 5'4" and I'm 4. She probably weighs 99 pounds. So she's a pretty petite, itty-bitty little gal. She's got dark, dark hair and screaming blue eyes that you can see from across the room. So she's a pretty gal. So she's petite, she's a pretty girl. She was looking for job opportunities here in Vigo County. And she went to one of our local car washes and she applied for a position that they had open there. She turns in her application. A couple days later, the hiring manager gives her a call and wants to set up an interview for her. So she's really excited to have the opportunity to interview. When you're a young kid, you turn in applications, you don't often get interviews, right? So she's pretty excited. She dresses really nicely. She goes into her interview. The interview goes really well. And the manager tells her, based on this interview and having the opportunity to speak with you, I would like to offer you the position of car sprayer offer. I'm sure there's another technical term for that, but that's my term for it because I don't know what it would be. So she's going to be spraying off the cars before the cars actually enter the machine that does the real hard work, right? He said, but even on the very hottest days of the summer, and we know here in Terre Haute it can get pretty hot, you will have to wear long sleeve shirts and gloves to come to work every day because you have visible tattoos. And I want my consumers to come to this car wash thinking you are here to wash their car and not to steal their car. So this gentleman had a bias that those that had visible tattoos were also those that would steal a car, right? If I was in that interview, I would have had to share with this gentleman that well before my daughter got her first tattoo, she stole her mom's car because she thought it would be a really cool idea to go do some joyriding on mom's dime, right? So before the thought of tattoos happened, my daughter was already interested in the car stealing business. Not really true, but you see what I'm saying. So we have biases based on appearance. Sometimes it is weight. Skinny people do drugs, fat people are lazy. Sometimes it's our age. Young people are ice cream liquor putterbackers in the freezers. There are condom snorters. They are Tide Pod eaters, right? Sometimes we say age, older people, they're more fragile. They're less technology competent, right? So we have biases based on appearance for a whole lot of different reasons. So if you would like to explore your biases a little bit more so that you can have a better understanding, Harvard has done this whole big study about implicit biases for a really long time. And they have a website that is dedicated to just implicit biases. And there's these tests that you can take. And they're kind of set up like a video game. So you're going to hit the picture on the left or the right based on whatever question it is that they are asking you. And when you're finished, they spit out this kind of result. Based on your test scores, you have inclination to this type of person, right? And there's several of these tests to choose from because, like I said, we hold biases for all sorts of different reasons, and we all have them. So from our sexuality, from disabilities, to what gender should be in what careers. And once we take these tests, or once our implicit biases kind of come to us and we have a better understanding of them, the results of these tests really shows us how we make those day-to-day decisions, including those split-second life or death decisions. So that gentleman who was the manager at the car wash, if he had just suffered a terrible trauma and either one had to have involvement with like emergency response or law enforcement officers, or had to present in the emergency room to receive some type of medical treatment, if any one of those individuals had visible tattoos, he may think that they're there to steal his car, right, and not to help him. So he may decide to refuse treatment from that doctor if they have visible tattoos, or he may refuse to not have that particular police officer assist him because of that bias. And so when we take those tests and we have an understanding of what our inclinations are, It gives us a better understanding of where the roots of all of our stereotypes come from, the roots of all of our prejudice, and it allows us to use more objective evaluations and treatment of others. So we're going to move on to stereotypes because bias is a personal preference, like or dislike, that interferes with our ability to be impartial and how we treat people. Our stereotypes are just ideas. And we attribute certain characteristics to all members of a group, a class, a set, a race. Stereotypes are used with negative connotations, right? We don't use stereotypes to be positive people. They are very oversimplified, exaggerated. We use stereotypes to demean others. So an example, if you think that all Asians are smart, or maybe that all Asians are really good at math, and that all white men can't dance, that is a stereotype. Right? Because it's very oversimplified and we're using all. But if you hire an Asian for a job that has an equally qualified black applicant because you just do not think that black people are as smart as Asian people, then that is a bias. You've actually taken action on your thoughts. Okay? And so just one more very simplified example of this. Our stereotypes are those ideas, those seeds that have been planted in us. This example is people with pink hair are mean. So somewhere growing up along the line, we were told, we were given the message that people with pink hair are mean, right? And maybe every pink-haired person we've ever met has been mean. Maybe we've never even encountered a pink-haired person, and so they are a mystery to us, so we must just think that they're mean, okay? And so the feeling then is our prejudice. I don't like people with pink hair. Why? Because they're mean. And again, maybe every pink-haired person we've ever met has been very mean and we have not liked them. But that discrimination, that action, that bias is, I'm not going to let pink-haired people sit with me at lunch. So that discrimination, that's the exclusion, right? All because we don't like them because we think that they're mean, right? And so I'm not really here so much to change your ideas. I'm not really here so much to change your feelings. But if we become aware of those two components, we really have more control on how we act. And we can make sure that we are being more inclusive. We are saying that tolerance is not just enough here in the city of Terre Haute, that we really are aiming for acceptance of all of our community members. And so, you know, as employees of the city of Terre Haute, we want to make sure that we are providing services without discrimination. So how can we do that? Some tools is not to be afraid to ask questions. So if you do overhear some people talking about something that may be very unique to a particular culture, ask them to tell you more about it. Generally, people like to talk about themselves. Right? So they're going to be very willing to share with you more about their culture, their heritage, their artifacts, their customs, their language, their beliefs, their values. Get feedback from those that you provided services to. If you get the opportunity to provide a service to someone and you can ask them, hey, how did I do today? Listen to that feedback and see what they have to say so that maybe you can adjust for the next time. Respectful communication, but that really includes our body language. We could be saying the most kind things out of our mouths, but our body language could be saying a whole different thing, right? People pick up on that body language. We can gain a keen awareness of our own biases, admit to them so that we can behave differently, recognize our privilege. Remember I said I think all of us experience some type of privilege. If we can use any of our privilege to empower others, we are encouraged to do so. We can call in or call out stereotypes that are used by our family, friends, and coworkers. So to call in somebody, if you hear somebody talking in a demeaning, discriminatory way, you can call them into a conversation and tell them, this is offensive because, and then tell them why. Explain to them that they don't always know what company they're keeping, and that sometimes even though we don't mean to talk in a negative, stereotypical way, sometimes we just do because we don't know any better. So use it as a learning opportunity so the next time they might make better word choices, or we can simply just call out stereotypes. You hear somebody talking in a discriminatory manner, say, hey, knock it off, I don't like that kind of talk. You don't want to necessarily call them into a conversation. Your relationship with that person is not strong enough. Maybe you don't have the time. But if we don't do either one of them, then we're simply saying our ears are safe spaces for that type of talk. So anytime you want to talk in a negative way about other people, please come and talk to me because it's safe to talk to me, right? And that just perpetuates a negative culture. So to call in or to call out stereotypes is a tool to make sure we're providing high quality services. More tools where we can widen our circle of friends. So we can add some diversity in our lives. We can try a different type of food, listen to a different type of music, read some books, watch some documentaries about some things that maybe interest us. We can facilitate and engage in those not easy, uncomfortable, complicated conversations. There are a million things going on right now today that somebody is sensitive about. Talk about it. Find out why. Learn about the worldviews of other people and why that might be so offensive. And then I ask that we understand that fair does not mean equal. And so when I do this presentation and I have a little bit more time, I like to do a little activity where when my participants walk into the room, I hand some of them an index card. And on that index card, there is an injury written on it. And these injuries range from a bug bite that's been picked until it bleeds, concussion, vomiting, somebody has to get ran over by a car, somebody has to have a broken bone, there's maybe a bleeding hangnail, a paper cut. And when we get to this part of the presentation, I ask those people to join me in the front of the room. And I line them all up and I go down individually and I ask each one of them to explain to us what their injury was. I want to give each one an equal opportunity to tell us what's wrong. And then after they tell me what their injury is, I console each one of them. I offer my condolences and tell them I'm so sorry that they're experiencing that. And then I give each participant a Band-Aid. And I make sure the Band-Aid is the same size. The Band-Aid is of the same brand. And if the Band-Aid has any characters on it, I make sure each person receives the same character on their Band-Aid. Because I want to make sure that I'm giving everybody equal treatment, right? Because we've been told equality is where it's at. We have to treat everybody equally, right? But am I being fair? The person who's been ran over by a car, is that Band-Aid going to help them at all? That person who has a concussion or that person who is vomiting, is a Band-Aid going to help? No. So it's only going to help a small portion of those that had any injuries. Right? And so sometimes our treatment has to be a little different so that everybody has equal access to an opportunity. Okay? So that's kind of the difference there. We've been told treat everybody the exact same, but I know that if I'm treated exactly like everybody else in this room, I'm going to have needs that still are not met. Right? And I still may not have access to opportunity. Like our participants here, they didn't have access to the treatment that they needed for their particular injury. So I am told a lot that that part of this conversation here today is the trickiest for people to grasp. So what that might look like in a work environment. If we have a single parent that works in our department and they're expected to work 8 hours, right? We're open 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. But they are the only adult that can get their children off the school bus safely. Is it okay to adjust their schedule so maybe they only take a 30-minute lunch hour? Or maybe they come in at 7:55 so that they can leave at 3:55 so that they can rush home and get their kids off the bus, right? We're still providing them equal access to be an employee in our department, but we're giving them something a little different so that we can be fair to them because their circumstance might be different than our circumstance. And when we see somebody who may be getting different treatment, the first thing that we want to say is that's not fair. We think somebody is getting something more, therefore it feels like something is being taken away from us. When we may not even need that resource in the first place. We may not have children that we have to get off the bus. We may not even have children, right? So we don't need that resource, but we still feel like something is being taken away from us. Another example of that might be, like the Vigo County School Corporation has that backpack program for those kiddos that are so food insecure that they may not have enough to eat over the weekend. So teachers, counselors send home backpacks full of food to those kiddos. But if another kiddo sees that somebody else is going home with something more, the first thing they say is, oh, that's not fair, even though those kiddos have food at home, right? So sometimes we do just need to do things a little different. Treat people as individuals instead of as clumps of individuals so that we can make sure that they all have equal access to opportunity so that everybody can be treated fairly, even if it is a little different. So we're good? Because that kind of moves us right along to our right to equal opportunity and our rights and responsibilities, what we need to do, and knowing our anti-harassment policy. So we're good on the first part. I know I kind of went through it really quick. I know it's after lunchtime. I know all of the food is starting to settle in our bellies, and I think it's kind of cold in here, so it's the perfect napping opportunity. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me this afternoon. So this part really is how we treat each other as coworkers. So harassment is that unwelcome conduct that is based on a protected status. So that race, color, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, okay? And harassment is not just a one-time incident. Unless that incident is so grandiose that it's just so big that it encompasses a lot of different sections of your life, harassment is ongoing conduct that is very offensive, and it becomes a condition of your continued employment. So you have to endure this harassment in order to keep your job. It is also unlawful where it is so severe and so pervasive that it creates a hostile work environment, an intimidating, abusive work environment. And a reasonable person has to say, this conduct has created this hostile work environment for that person. And this reasonable person in this particular law is whoever you would report to. So here for the City of Terre Haute, you can make reports to the Human Relations Commission. You can go to your department head, your supervisor, your manager, however your organizational charts look like. You can go to City Legal, you can go to Human Resources, right? So we do have some different choices that we can make. You also can go to state and federal organizations that handle this type of work. So again, it has to be unwelcome. Some of us have a certain type of camaraderie with our coworkers, right? Some of us may talk a certain way. Some of us may hug and kiss somebody when we see them in the morning. Some of us may tap them on the bottom, right? That happens a lot when people work very, very closely together. And that is welcomed behavior. Harassment is that unwelcome behavior that is based on a protected class. So that can be taunts, threats, intimidation due to that protected status, written or electronic communications that are derogatory, so that could be our social media, email, text messages, graffiti directed toward a protected group, slang or language that has taken on a derogatory or negative meaning against a protected group. Third-party harassment. So a group of employees is over here talking in a derogatory, stereotypical, discriminatory way. And another employee walks up to them and says, hey, group of employees, the way you're talking is very discriminatory, and I want you to knock it off. But group of employees continues to talk in the same way. So that can be third-party harassment if somebody else finds it uncomfortable. And so sexual harassment is the same thing. It's just of a sexual nature. So any unwelcome, unsolicited sexual advance, requests for sexual favors, verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that is severe or pervasive enough to create that hostile, intimidating work environment. The law tells us that there's two forms, the first being the quid pro quo, so something for something, and the next being hostile environment, which can be verbal or nonverbal. So some examples. Better work in exchange for a sexual relationship. Simple. You don't have to work nights, you don't have to work overtime, you don't have to work out in hot sun if you provide me this sexual favor or this sexual relationship. And sometimes that comes from people with actual power, and sometimes it's people with perceived power. Right? There are people that work in different environments that think they have much more power than they really do, especially if they hold seniority. So they may have a higher pay rate just because they've been here to receive all of the raises moving up, but when you look at the organizational chart, they are the same on the organizational chart, the same level as the person that they're harassing. But oftentimes that perceived power can really threaten a new employee. So it should be considered sexual harassment when it is unwelcome to a recipient or an observer. So an observer can absolutely make a complaint. And then again, a reasonable person would find the conduct to create a hostile work environment. So what is hostile work environment? Really is just when an employee is subjected to this unwelcome, unsolicited behavior that makes the environment intimidating, hostile, abusive. You're not comfortable coming to work. It can result from physical, verbal, nonverbal, or a combination of all of those. The behaviors may be subtle. They may not be big, grandiose behaviors time and time again. They may be very subtle behaviors over and over. These behaviors could be from anyone. So it could be from one of our consumers. It could be from a vendor. It can be from a contractor. It can be from a seasonal employee. So example, the person who comes in to fill, I don't know if we have Coke or Pepsi, but the Pepsi person comes in and fills our Pepsi machine. And every time they come in, whoever they deal with, they tap that person on the bottom or touch that person in some kind of way that makes that person feel uncomfortable. They say something about their physical appearance. Maybe they do some catcalling when they see that person in the hallway. And the employee tells their supervisor, their department head, hey, every time Pepsi person comes, they come in here and they touch me and they make comments about my attractiveness. And they make me feel really uncomfortable. Then it is the responsibility of the department head, the supervisor, to make sure the next time the Pepsi person comes in that they do not behave in that kind of way, right? So this behavior can be from anyone that we have contact with while we are in our work environment. And it has to be related to any of the protected classes or sexual. So hostile work environment, some examples of that might be physical conduct. So that might be touching of another person's body without their consent, lewd gestures, cornering, trapping, blocking, stalking, following another person, attempted or actual assault, or retaliation for making a report or complaint. It is against the law for you to lose your job because you made a complaint or you participated in the investigation of somebody else who made a complaint. So some examples can be verbal, so remarks about the physical characteristics, appearance, attractiveness. Catcalling can go in those verbal comments. Jokes, innuendos. Nonverbal, so displays with an explicit derogatory content. If you really enjoy reading a particular magazine and you bring that magazine into work with you from home and you're reading it and somebody else, another employee, walks behind your back, they're rubbernecking, they look at your magazine and they see some kind of image that they find to be explicit and they say, hey, oh my gosh, that is so explicit, please don't bring that magazine back, I'm offended by that. Instead of leaving it at home, you bring it out and you put it on the table in the break room, so every time that person walks in, they have to see this explicit derogatory content. So that might be an example of that type of display. Any letters, notes, emails, Facebook postings. Unwanted gifts or attention. If somebody's giving you unwanted gifts, they are not gifts, they are threats, right? And any obscene gestures or leering. Again, these have to be unwanted and unsolicited. When I have done this presentation in some of our other departments, individuals have come up to me afterwards and they say, oh, when I'm leaving the parking lot and my friend's coming into the parking lot, we always flip each other off like it's a funny thing. If you guys think that that's great and that is wanted and it is okay and that's just the way that you guys have fun at work, continue doing that. If it ever becomes unwanted, that's when it's a hostile work environment. So discrimination is conduct that includes that whole broad spectrum of all of those different things that we just talked about. Different treatment directed toward an individual or group of individuals based on their protected class that negatively affects their employment. Favoritism is not discrimination unless somebody is being favored because of their protected class. One of the things that I get the most calls about in employment, not just here for the city of Terre Haute, but employment in general, a lot of people feel that they're being discriminated against because their boss just favors somebody else. And when asked, well, what protected class do you feel you're being discriminated under? Is it because of your gender? Is it because of your color? Is it because of your national origin, your sexual orientation? Oh no, they just don't like me as much as they like somebody else, right? So favoritism is not discrimination. But some examples of discriminatory conduct could be negative action. So you're not hired, you are fired, you're not given a promotion, you are given disciplines, you're given negative evaluations because of a protected class. Failing to provide a reasonable accommodation for a disability or religious belief. An example of that might be somebody has a specific religious belief that they have to pray during this time of the day. A reasonable accommodation is to allow them to take their lunch break or their break during that time of day so that they can engage in prayer. That is not the same as saying that they can engage in prayer 4 hours during their 8-hour work shift, right? But if it is reasonable that their lunch can be scheduled around that time, their afternoon break can be scheduled around that time, and that nobody else has hardship because they are taking time off to go and pray, that is a reasonable accommodation. And we cannot advertise a position as particularly wanting to hire a male or a female. That could be discriminatory. So I tell you all of that to tell you that if you believe that you are a target of harassment, hostile work environment, or discrimination, you have some responsibilities. And the very first thing that you are asked to do is to inform the harasser directly and tell them to stop. That this type of behavior is unwelcome, it is unwanted, and it must stop. If it stops, it ends there. There's no reason to continue it any further. If it doesn't stop, we ask that you report the incidents to management early so that we can prevent escalation of the problem. We don't want to wait until months and months have passed. Also, if you ever want to report to state or federal organizations, there are some time constraints to those organizations in which you have to report to. If you want to make your report to the Human Relations Commission, you must do so within 90 days of the alleged discriminatory act, right? Because we want to provide you the opportunity, if you don't get the answer you want here locally, to be able to pursue it at a state or federal level. And we want to make sure that you have the time to do that. And then you have to take advantage of all or any preventative or corrective opportunities that the city has in place based on our harassment policy. If you do choose to take it to a state or federal organization, if you have not reported it to your local employment office, or if you have not taken advantage of any of the preventative opportunities, they probably will not take your claim and kick you right back to the local level, right? They want to make sure that you can work, because the state and federal organizations want to end that discriminatory practice for that particular department or that particular business or organization. They can't always do that if an investigation has not been launched internally. Our anti-harassment policy tells us that we are encouraged to and have the responsibility to report if we observe somebody who is a target. So if we're not the target, but we see somebody else who's being targeted, we have the responsibility to report on behalf of that target. So that's really just bystander intervention. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Investigate. So if somebody does make a colorful remark and you hear it and you see that somebody is visibly upset about it, ask that person, how did that make you feel? Like, you look visibly upset, what's going on? Do a little bit more investigation to see how the target may feel. We can't assume that somebody else is going to help, because we know that if we step in, then we could too become a target of harassment, right? So a lot of times we want to turn a blind eye, we want to turn the other cheek, we don't want to get involved, it's just easier to walk away. But we have to think of the cost of not helping. Maybe this type of behavior, this type of conduct has been going on for a really long time, and the target has not felt that they've had a safe person to talk to. So thinking of that cost of not helping, how long has this been going on? What can I do to make this workplace not so hostile for that person? So how can we do that? We can directly tell the harasser to stop. So we can use I statements. I want you to stop talking. I want you to knock it off. I want you to walk away. We want to use I statements because we want to draw the attention away from the target. We want the harasser to now focus on us so that the target can get away. Maybe we don't feel that we have the skills to directly go up and confront somebody, and so we delegate. We tell somebody else, hey, go and get help, while I stay close to the situation to make sure that it doesn't turn volatile, that it doesn't escalate quickly, and then somebody else goes and gets the help to tell this harasser to stop. Maybe you don't feel comfortable directly confronting somebody. Maybe there's absolutely nobody around besides the three of you. You can create a distraction, create some type of commotion. Sing a song, do a dance, whatever it takes to get the harasser's attention off of the target so that the target can get away and get help, and then that harasser is now focused on you and the target has moved away. So knowing the policy that governs this type of conduct is very helpful so that we know how to act if we're ever in this position. Alleged violations should be kept as confidential as possible for many different reasons. We don't want the target's information on blast. We don't want to gossip and have rumors started about people. We also, this is alleged, right? So the harasser may be innocent and we don't want to have their information put on blast either. If an investigation or an inquiry is launched and people are gossiping about it, talking about it, it's really going to skew the results of that investigation. So we want to try to make sure that we're collecting good information and not rumors and gossip. So keeping those violations as confidential as possible. It is also kept confidential by city legal or the Human Relations Commission. So if you do need to make a complaint, you can do that confidential as well. If you are the target, or again, if you observe somebody who is the target, no action will be taken against you for making a report, but because our anti-harassment policy says that we have the responsibility to report, action could be taken against us for not making a report, right? So Johnny goes into city legal and says, hey, for the last 6 months, so-and-so has been harassing me and really making my work environment hostile. Here's my journal of all the dates and times and incidents that have happened. And in this journal, each time Melissa Reed witnessed that action and Melissa Reed didn't do anything to step in or to make that better, to make that report, Melissa Reed could receive some disciplinary action because I did not follow our policy. Does that make sense? But again, if in the beginning when we were talking about bystander intervention, if you directly tell somebody to knock it off and they stop, that's enough, right? Then that's not harassment. That's not hostile work environment. That might have just been somebody saying something stupid, not knowing any better, right? So if it is a one-time isolated incident, you say knock it off, they knock it off, it can end there. If it continues to go on and you continue to see that conduct, that is when you are asked to act. Violations of the policy will not be tolerated and will result in appropriate disciplinary action. The whole thing, though, is that it's confidential, right? This process should be kept as confidential as possible. So if you are the target or if you are somebody who is making a report on behalf of somebody else, you may not know what the disciplinary action is that was received by the harasser, right? Because they have the right to confidentiality. Their human resource file is not open for all to view. There is some confidentiality there. You should receive some type of follow-up, though, that an investigation or an inquiry was launched. You should receive some type of follow-up that your complaint was heard and that corrective actions were taken. And if the behavior continues, we really encourage you to make another report. Okay. Any questions? Thoughts, comments, concerns? Thoughts, ideas? Because that's all I have for you guys this afternoon. I know we went through it really, really fast. This is my 20th time giving this presentation. So like I've been doing this in my sleep. So I know that it can kind of get a little dry. But if you don't have any questions or concerns, if you did not sign in, please sign in so that you get credit for being here today. I would hate for you guys to have to sit through it again. But otherwise, that's all I have for you in under 60 minutes.